All right, hello, welcome everybody to Queering Education. We are so excited to have you here today. My name is Frederick. My pronouns are they, them. I am Out Youth's Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator. I am here with my co-host E, who will be moderating the panel in the chat, so feel free to ask questions, throw those in there. I will be handling the recording and text side of it, so I will not be chatting with you. But I'm here watching, and we are super excited to welcome Jean. And E, if you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll pass it over to Jean, and then you can introduce yourself, do the screen share, and all that good stuff.
Hi, everyone. I'm E. I use they, them pronouns. I am the founder and president of the Central Texas GSA Coalition, as well as the founder of Queering Education. And like Frederick said, I'll be here moderating the chat. You know, if there are resources shared, then I will drop those in the chat as well. Feel free to ask questions via either the Q&A or the chat function, and we'll answer those either throughout the panel or at the end. So Jean, if you want to go ahead and kick it off.
Sure, I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. Alrighty. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Jean, and I use they, them, their pronouns. And I identify as a queer, bisexual, and gender fluid person. I have actually been out to varying degrees at all of my previous jobs over the past 10 years. And right now I'm nonprofit engagement manager at Catch a Fire, but I'm also president of a nonprofit board. And I also teach Latin dance through a gender inclusive and consent focused lens. And I'm really, really excited today to be able to talk to you all about trying to find a space where you could work that's queer friendly. I really struggled in my career to find a mentor that had some shared experiences with me, and I feel like I had to learn the hard way how to find a space that felt welcoming and safe for me. And I realized that that's like a big privilege to be able to be out at a job and to be picky enough to do that with your employment. But I want people that feel they can do that or have the capacity to be a little bit more selective about their employment to not have to learn the hard way, like learn from other people that have had to struggle and not know what to do. And some quick fun facts, I love public speaking. It's actually what my job here at Catch a Fire is. And I'm a really big believer in mentorships. And my last point on here is that I spread the trans agenda. And I kept that on my little bio slide just because at one of the places I've taught at, they said that they were okay with me being there as a trans person, but that they did not appreciate or approve of my spreading of the trans agenda. And it's something that, because I end up getting really annoyed when people try to tell me what to do, I then leaned really far into it, and now it's essentially my catchphrase. And I do hope to spread the trans agenda because it sounds like a better agenda than the white cishet agenda, in my opinion. And I would really love for everyone in the chat to share their name and pronouns, just because I want to make sure I'm not referring to you incorrectly. And especially when we do Q&A, I'm going to ask for you to, again, list your name and pronouns. So I just really want to talk about, like, the goal of today is for you to figure out if you can find a space that it's not going to be the default that someone is straight or allosexual or cisgender. Regardless of your gender, your appearance, the sex you were assigned at birth, your name, no matter what, there is no default. And I think it's really important to find a place where that is truly believed and upheld. But how do we find that, right? Before I go into the house, I just want to let you all know, like, the path we're going to go down today, so you're not just staring at your clock for 90 minutes hoping I take a break to speak. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your mindset and priorities, and then how to actually conduct your job search. And then I'm going to pause for questions. I want to make sure that there are distinct spots for you to ask and get your questions answered. So feel free, you can ask while I'm talking, even I don't take it personally. You should totally feel free. I love questions. And then I'll go into the interview process and what you should be doing after an interview to really be finding this environment that feels right for you personally. And then I'll again pause for some questions. And then the last section I'll do is about if and when you get an offer, what to do, and how you can handle after you started, if you have come out or if you want to come out or you cannot come out. All of these are things that can realistically happen. And then we'll close with some more questions. So if that sounds good to you, I want to go right into mindset and priorities. So I have a poll. I would love to know what kind of a job you're looking for. Are you looking for an entry level or a first job that's part-time, or maybe a part-time at mid-level like a manager? Or are you looking for some type of a full-time career, entry level, mid-level, or whatever you can get at this point? I'd love to be able to see it, but I'm also trying to figure it out. Here we go. I don't know if I can actually see this poll while I'm doing this, which is the next issue here. Okay, well, this is entirely on me that I don't know how to actually look at the results, so I'm going to apologize for that. But I'm asking mainly not for me. I'm really asking for you. And the reason is, before you do your job hunt, you need to think about what your priorities are and where you're at in life right now. I want you to think about what exactly are you looking for in a job, not even thinking about your identity, your gender, your sexual orientation. What kind of a job are you looking for, and what is the trajectory in the future? And then after that, if you feel like you want part-time, full-time, entry level, something else, a survival job, there's no judgment. From there, I really want you to think about if you're prepared to be out, or are you prepared, if need be, if you really need a job, are you prepared to be in the closet or be misgendered or feel unsafe or uncomfortable frequently? It's really important to consider that, because it's really important for your mental health and for your safety. And to really examine how important is it to you that you're out at your job. I really want to just highlight it. It is not a judgment from anyone in the community, or at least it's not a judgment from me if you decide you don't want to be out. That is a personal choice, and it could be around your safety or just you wanting to be private. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's really no wrong thing while we're all trying to deal with a capitalist society and trying to do our best to survive. And at the end of the day, that's what I really want you to think about, is what will be the most successful way for you to thrive as a human being and be healthy. And then from there, just start thinking about how important it is for your employer to be queer friendly, and what that might look like for you, and the importance of their mission and their business goals. Like, do you feel like you need to be aligned with the type of work your company is doing, or is the culture important enough? Or honestly, are you just looking for something to pay bills because that's your top priority? Again, no wrong answer. But when you're looking at all these things about what queer friendly in a workplace means, it might mean that they really enforce pronouns at every meeting and on their website and on business cards, and that all of their language includes different types of partners and different types of relationships. There are a lot of different ways that you can look at queer friendliness, and it might depend on your priorities. Really looking at what kind of health benefits you get, and how exactly they define family and different types of cultural things at your organization. But I tend to think it's really important to think about intersectionality if you're looking for a place that's queer friendly, because if a place is not Black or people of color friendly, it is inherently not queer friendly. And that goes for ableism as well, because these are all intersecting identities. And if there's a gap in how they're supporting one community, that means that they're not going to be as supportive as they can be to yours, regardless of what someone might say or how you might feel. It might be great for someone that is like a cis white gay male, but it might not be as welcoming for anyone else in the queer community. And it's really important that you keep that in mind. And then the way I typically look at my job hunt, anytime I'm looking for a new gig or a new career, is I first think about what I don't want to do and what I don't want in general. I think it's really easy to think about all of the wish list and all of the wants, but it's easier to narrow it down based on your deal breakers, because you're opening up more opportunities and things you might have not have considered in your job hunt. But it also just creates a really clear boundary of what you are willing and not willing to accept in a workplace. And that's really important as you're doing your search. And it's something you're going to want to keep checking in with as you're going through the job search process. Like, after you're applying and when you're interviewing and when you get offers. It's really important to think about those deal breakers. And then think about your long-term personal and professional goals. Maybe your goal is that you want a job that will comfortably support your passion for art, so that you can just work during the day and then be able to support your creativity. Or maybe you're looking for a job right now that will eventually propel you into like a career. Like maybe you really want to do some work around being like a manager or working at a nonprofit or serving people in a community. I'm not, again, not making a judgment on where you want to work, but it might be important to think about those long-term goals. Like, where do you think you might want to be in 5 to 7 years? And once you've thought about those goals and the path it might take to get there, I recommend that you also are prepared to completely abandon those plans. So it's good to have like a soft plan for what you want to do in life, but don't be so rigid that you won't accept other opportunities or try things, because nothing will ever be as predictable as you think it will be in your career. And sometimes you won't even know that you wanted something until you try it. I feel like that's probably the best advice I got, was to have a plan and then be ready to completely ditch that plan. And I will say that I did essentially do that. I work at a tech platform now. And if you had asked me that 10 years ago, if I'd be working at a tech platform, I probably would not have thought so. But I was willing to throw away the plan for a place that I wanted to work at, and people I wanted to work with. And as you're thinking about what you want and what you can and cannot tolerate, you really need to think about your privilege and opportunities. Do you have the ability to hold off on getting a job? Like, how urgent is it that you get a career or get a job that pays you right now? Can you hold it off by a few weeks? Is this offer going to make or break your bills or set you into some serious debt? Those are all things you really need to consider. And then the privilege you have around being able to wait or not wait is really important to consider. If you have the money to wait, that is a privilege and that's great. And I highly encourage you to be able to do that. But I do think it's really important to acknowledge it. And then really look at what your top 3 priorities are for your next job. Maybe your top 3 priorities are workplace culture, healthcare benefits, and mission. Or maybe your priorities are honestly like your pay, where it's located, and what other kinds of non-salary benefits you can receive. There's really no wrong answer, but it is important to think about what are the 3 things that you really absolutely need in this next job. For me, it was a workplace culture, it was mission, and it was health benefits. Those were all very important to me. And there, again, nothing wrong, no judgment. I just really wanted to be out at my job and for it not to feel like a whole production that I use they, them pronouns and that I'm not straight. And so for me, when I was doing my hunt, I really applied those 3 priorities to every place I applied to even. And so when you think about this job search, since I'm kind of seamlessly introed into how you might look, the way I think about my strategy when I'm job hunting, and I find has been the most useful in my past few positions, is to do like a preliminary research on the places you're thinking of applying to. I don't typically recommend putting so much labor into the research before you've even applied, just because it's really a game of numbers when you're applying for jobs. You're going to get a lot of no's or no answers, and I don't think it's really worth spending that amount of research until you've gotten a little bit further on in the job search process. But there's, again, no right or wrong way. I just have personally found it's not worth my time to dig into where a company spends their money too aggressively before I've even applied, just because it might not be worth my time. If they don't answer me, I've just spent that time for, frankly, nothing. So it goes really into the second point of consider what's best for your time. Like, what is the best way for you to use the time of job hunting? Searching for a job takes so much time. I know it's like this cliche that it's a full-time job to look for a job, but it really is. And it can be easier or it can be really difficult. If you're looking for like a white collar job, it might not be in your best interest to do these applications where it's like all being filtered into a form and you have to upload documents and then input the information anyway. I personally don't apply to those because I think that they're pretty ableist. And so just on my own principles, that's usually my deal breaker. But again, it's entirely up to you, and that might not be an option. If you're looking for something that's more retail focused or at a large company, there will most likely be one of those annoying forms. And again, it's really up to what you prefer and what you think will be worth your time. And as you're thinking about this job search, the strategy you need to go in with is thinking about what you want and don't want to disclose before you search. Unfortunately, it will result in some kind of implicit bias. No matter what people say, there is some connotation with pronouns and disclosing a gender or your sexual orientation or anything. But I tend to think about, do I want to work at a place where they're off-put by pronouns or off-put by me being open about my sexual orientation or my gender? And for me, the answer was no, not really, because I've done that for, I had done that for about 7 or 5, 6 years. And I was just tired of being in the closet to some degree. But maybe you want to at least get your foot in the door before you disclose that. Nothing wrong with it, but I think it's really helpful to make those decisions before you start your job search and before you've rewritten your resume and before you write all these cover letters, because making the decisions up front will make the job search portion of your hunt a lot more seamless. And the next thing is building your network. It is extremely important that you create a network of people that might have connections to potential jobs. I would say like most of the jobs I've gotten have been based on some kind of a connection. And that seems to be the trend for a lot of people now. I won't say it's the only way to get a job, but it is very helpful. And also it can help you get some advice on different industries that might be welcoming for you and your talents and your skills, or maybe the goals you have in life. And it will just help you develop some more expertise around what you're looking for. And maybe it's just going to give you advice on what you do and don't want to do. And then when you finally figured out your resume and you have some general ideas of what kinds of jobs you're looking for, you should talk to anyone and everyone that you know and trust. And I say that because you never know who might have heard of someone hiring or has some kind of a connection. And it puts very little effort on you to just say like, hey, I just want to share my resume with you. I'm looking for a job in XYZ. If you hear of anything, could you think of me or let me know so I could apply? Or I'd just love your advice on if you think there's anything in the industry that might work for me. It's just a really quick way to just put some feelers out there to see if maybe someone knows of a lead. And then finally, for this page, think about finding a mentor. I really think mentorship is extremely important. While I couldn't find a mentor that understood my experiences really, it was still helpful to have someone give me advice on my resume and give me advice on my cover letters and just what the general job search process looks like. Like telling me, oh, this email that comes off like this, maybe the tone should be different, or hey, I heard about this company and they're not great. It's just helpful to have a professional give you some ideas, but I do want to highlight you don't pay mentors. I feel like I've heard some mixed information, but you do not have to pay a mentor for giving you information or help. I would say to approach it, you want to be really upfront about what you're looking for and what you want. When I've asked mentors to be my mentor, I usually just say like, I'm looking for a mentor because I want to find a fundraising job that is friendly to my sexual orientation and my gender. But I don't know how to get there right now because I'm a few levels below that. And they helped me with that goal because I said, I'd love to meet monthly and we could work on what I should personally be doing to help advance myself to that level. So really setting clear goals, expectations, and making your request really clear is super helpful. The more direct and honest you are in your communications around like especially mentorship will be really helpful. And I still talk to my mentors today, and sometimes they still send me job opportunities, or they tell me that someone they know is looking for a mentor and who I can connect them with. So it can really be a career-long relationship if you want it to be. And of course, it's really hard to figure out where to find some listings. Obviously, you might know already some usual suspects like LinkedIn or Indeed, but you can also look at some job boards specifically tailored for the LGBTQIA2+ community. Also, the deck will be sent out later, but it does have clickable links so that you don't have to try and write these notes down. I should have mentioned that earlier. But you can look at all LGBT jobs. Pink Jobs has quite a few listings. The Out Professional Network has listings, and it also is just a group for you to network with. So it's kind of a twofold of building your community and also looking for jobs. You can look at the Transgender Job Bank, HRC's Corporate Equality Index if you want to look for companies that have been labeled as LGBTQ friendly. And then there's the LGBT Job Network. And these are all places that you can just find some listings that have passed some kind of a litmus test around being some kind of queer friendly. But I will say these are not listings that have parsed out who is a radically queer friendly organization or to what extent they're LGBT friendly. There's really no checks and balances on it that way. It would be very difficult to enforce anyway. And so when you're looking at jobs, I would just keep that in the back of your head as you're searching. But there's nothing wrong with that inherently. It's just something you want to keep in mind, especially if that's a priority for you. I feel like it's possible that it is based on the people in the room and also the way this event was described. But it's at least a good starting point so that you're not applying to like Hobby Lobby or something like that. And I had talked about building your network, but I feel like it's one thing just to tell someone to build their network very vaguely, and it's another to give some recommendations. And I really want you all to come out of today with some tangible things that you can do and some real action items for you. So you can attend some events at your local LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. And if you click on that link, it will actually bring you to the National LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, and then you can look for your specific local chapter. And I find that particularly helpful if you want to get connected, especially at a for-profit organization or company. They often have like networking events, and you can learn a little bit more about people in your community that have jobs similar to what you want. I know that the National LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce is having virtual events, so you could actually attend those as well. So maybe if you're looking for a job that's maybe not particularly local, or maybe you want something that's remote, so location doesn't matter, or you're looking to move, it might be helpful for you to just go to the national events as well. I also would recommend joining an LGBTQ professional or a student association if you're still in school, because you can start building networks there and creating some relationships, but again, so you can find out some listings. And more importantly, I think it's just helpful to know what jobs are like. Sometimes you think you want a role until you hear what it really is. My favorite example is I thought I had wanted to be an executive director of a nonprofit. And so I decided that I would become an executive assistant, because what better way to decide if I want that type of a role in like 15, 20 years than to just be an EA and work for an executive director. And I very quickly found out I don't want to become an executive director. It seems extremely stressful. I have different opinions about how nonprofits are run now, so that definitely impacted the opinion as well. But it gave me a more critical lens into the role itself, and not just the idea of a title and what it seems like it could be. And so joining these associations, you can learn from other people about the roles they have and see if that's something that might work for you, might be interesting. And then finally, get involved with your local LGBT community center. Even if it's just to build some community and not helping you directly with your job search, it can be really empowering to be around other people that are like going to really reinforce your identity and are supportive of you as a person. And to build community is going to be really important for you, regardless of if you choose to be out of the closet or in the closet at work. Because being around people that are going to validate you and your experiences and your identities is just so important. And it's going to be a kind of self-care regardless of the environment you end up in. So I do want to pause for questions, if there are any. But if you have questions, I would love for you to put your name and your pronouns in. Let me see. Oh, I love that E is putting in the links. Thank you, E. I don't see any questions yet, but I do want to encourage you to ask them. I feel like sometimes the job search just can feel really overwhelming. I feel like when I first started, it felt like searching for a job was some secret language, and some people knew exactly how to do it and what the tricks were to impress an employer and to get your way in the door. And other people just didn't have that. And I imagine that is based on some some inherent classism around just who gets that kind of information. But it is helpful just to know that you can ask the questions. But I'm happy to keep going. Again, just if you have a question, don't feel shy. There is no unintelligent question. And it could be directly about the job search, or it could be tangentially about looking for a job or what the workplace might look like, or just asking about experiences. I'm pretty much an open book. Nothing I'm saying here is a secret. And I'm just happy to kind of share what I've learned. So let's say that you've been doing your job search and you start getting interviews. I would say this is where the bulk of your labor when you're doing a job search really should be in prepping for interviews. Really, I would say that's where the amount of time you spend will be worth the most, because once you've gotten a decent resume and you feel like you've gotten a good cover letter, that should be pretty much your template for everything. You might change some information, but the moment that you meet with an employer or talk on the phone with an employer, that's when the real search begins, because that's when you're building a relationship that possibly will turn into a job for you. So once you've gotten an interview, what you want to do is get a lot of information on the people that you might be working with and the organization itself. So I recommend that you look at Glassdoor, look at their reviews, and look at some of the estimated salaries that are there. That will give you a really good idea of some of the employees and how they have experienced the workplace. If you don't know what Glassdoor is, it's essentially just like a platform where you review your experience at a company, and you can talk about interviews as well. So if you don't get a job, or you do, you can talk about the interview process itself, and it can give you an idea of what you're walking into on the day of. You want to feel prepared and not like you're going to be surprised. And then while you're interviewing, I would say find out if you have any connections to a current or a former employee, because you can find out how queer friendly they are. Like, what are they doing for DEI, or what is the culture like? Do you think I'd fit in? But I feel like I really need to highlight, please do not just like cold call or reach out to people you don't know at all and have no connections to. It can be really off-putting for people at the company. And I tend to think that it just, it just annoys people, and it doesn't really get anything that you might want out of a job search. Whereas if you have some kind of an introduction that someone can make for you, that will make all the difference in building a relationship with someone. And even if you don't get the job, if you end up having at least a good connection with them, you could keep talking to them about other opportunities. Honestly, I've had that happen before, where I was looking at a job at a university, and I had one of my friends connect me to someone that worked there, and I was interested in the place, but then when I didn't ultimately get the role, I still kept in contact with this person, and they ended up just being someone I would go to for advice, or if I had questions about a different organization or a different school, what they thought about it. And that can be really helpful. I would say really what I want you to get out of today is that relationship building is extremely important, especially if you're looking for a white collar or like a specifically office focused job. And you're looking at like a long-term career of some sort. And then finally, I just want to make sure that before you go into an interview that you know your rights. Really look at what an employer in your state can and cannot ask you about yourself. And I don't know if there is enough ways for me to say just how important that is. And again, all of these links are clickable, so when you get this later today, you'll be able to look at it yourself. But you want to make sure that you're not being backed into a corner and forced to disclose information you are not obligated to share. You don't want to encourage people to be part of the problem here in being just queer antagonistic. And also, you don't want to put yourself in that kind of a position. So the more information you have, the more safe you can feel, because you're going in with a lot more predictability. Just imagine how scary it might be if you go into an interview and you know the name of the company and you know generally what they do, and that's all of the information you have. You have no idea if they might be supportive of queer and trans people. You have no idea how employees currently feel there. And you have no idea around what they can and cannot ask in an interview. That is a lot of unpredictable factors. You want to limit that as much as humanly possible, not just for you and your personal safety and comfort, but also because you want to come off to an employer as being very well informed about your job search. And not only because you want to seem like you know what you're doing, but because it will make you a more competitive candidate. They will realize that you're being more selective and that it's really a two-way street. I think some employers might forget that it is an interview for both the employer, but also for you. You are interviewing these people just as much as they are interviewing you. You want to make sure that these are people you want to work with and want to work for, and that this is a company that you can see yourself not being 100% miserable all the time, or maybe you want to be very happy. But making it clear that you know what you're doing and you're being selective will really help you in this search. And so I wanted to provide some like really specific examples and like show you how to do it, which it could be annoying, who knows, but I really wanted to make sure that the information is as clear as possible. So one thing you want to do is check the Better Business Bureau for wherever you're applying. And the example I use is Planned Parenthood of New York City. And this will just give you a general idea of their governance, their finances, what kind of fundraising they do. It's going to only give you some general overviews, but you can see if there are complaints made against them and if they're not in compliance with the Better Business Bureau. And that can be helpful. You want to know that you're not walking into a place where they're not even treating the people they serve right, and that there are some egregious grievances against the people that organize. It's super important to really know the type of people you might be working with. And honestly, the people you're going to be in a room with for probably 30 to 60 minutes, or I mean, when I say in the room, I kind of mean like in a Zoom or a video conference for now, but I think you get my gist. Your time is just as valuable as theirs. So I want to make sure that you are valuing your own time. And if this is a company that has a lot of complaints, or it's clear that they have bad governance, which means like how the organization is run by their board or by their CEOs and their C-suite, it's really important to understand that. You don't want to walk into a place that is so toxic that it may go under, and then you won't have a job. So even if you don't have the luxury of being out and being able to be very, very selective about a career, you want to at least be selective about the environment you're going into for the sake of keeping a job and being able to get money. And I've learned that, unfortunately, the hard way, but we could talk a little bit more about that if it comes up. The next is before you get into this interview, you want to look at where these people and this organization is giving their money to. So this will bring this link, if you click on it, it will bring you to Open Secrets. And it's a database where you can look up organizations or individuals that have donated to political action committees, PACs. They've given to campaigns for elections, and you can find out if they've given to specific organizations. It's really helpful to know this. You might not want to work at a company where they have donated a lot of money to Donald Trump, or maybe you don't want a company where they've donated to the NRA. It's really up to what your priorities and your values are, and that's totally fine. But I feel like it's really helpful to know where they're putting their money, because for a company, where they put their money is where their values are at, regardless of if that's what they intend or not. And I would say you also might want to look up the head of the organization and where they're giving their money to. And that's just because they're the person that's leading the culture of your organization, the values, the mission, everything that a company is doing is like really dictated by the CEO. So if they're giving all of their money to an organization that's anti-choice or that directly hurts queer and trans people, I would not recommend you work there. That sounds like you're going to walk into a very dangerous environment. And I would also ask them about anything that seems questionable. When you go into this interview, you want to make sure you flag it for them. There's nothing wrong with saying like, hey, I noticed that you gave, I don't know, $1 million to Mitch McConnell, and I'd love to hear a little bit more information about why your company did that, or something like that. You can ask it in a very like polite way. That's not rude. It's just you saw something on public record and you're curious about it. But just know that, again, like anything you bring up like that, it may result in you not getting a job, but I would posit that it's not worth a job if it's something you feel so strongly about that you need to ask about it. It goes back to your deal breakers, I would say. Next is if they're a nonprofit, you want to look at their 990. A 990 is essentially their tax form, and it details their revenue, their net assets, board members, information about what their organization does. And they're due every year. All nonprofits are supposed to have them over, I believe, $50,000 in revenue. So if it's smaller than that, it might not have a 990 yet. And that's something that will impact how much information you can get about them. But a 990 is so important. I worked at an organization where I didn't know what their financial situation was. And had I known in my very early entry-level years to look at a 990, I could have probably avoided some personal strife around like my values and just my stress level. But unfortunately, I didn't know how to look at a 990 and how to really read it. So I vaguely looked at a 990, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I didn't understand what to look for. And so I'm telling you, in case you don't know, which you may know, I have no idea. Maybe you are significantly smarter than me, it's very likely. But you wanna look at their revenue. What types of revenue are they getting? Is it grants? Is it from individuals, et cetera? And then their net assets. So after you've combined the revenue with how much money they spent in a year, how much do they have left? If they end in a deficit, which means that they paid more than they got in money, you wanna look at another 990 of theirs. You wanna make sure that they don't have many years of deficits because that is a red flag. Another red flag is if they don't have 990s, but they definitely make over the correct amount of money, which is 50K again in the US. It's different sometimes per state, but bare minimum is if you make over 50K, you need a 990. And another thing that I would flag is the compensation for the leaders of the organization. So looking at that net revenue and the revenue in general and the expenses, and then looking at how much money the CEO or the executive director makes, the VP of development, the chief operating officer, these are all very important to look at. If you're seeing extremely high numbers, but not very high revenue, that is a red flag. That tells you, and it tells me at least, that they are paying the head of their organization significantly more than they're paying their employees. And that matters a lot to me, frankly. It might not matter as much for you, but I do think it's important because it can impact how they financially plan for their organization. And if they're at a deficit in that year and they paid a significant amount of money to their head of their organization, I would be alarmed by that, frankly. And I would start asking some questions about a 990. And you can look at who's on the board. It might be helpful to see if someone left the board very suddenly, or if there have been a lot of new board members, comparing it to what their current board list is. But when you're looking at this 990 and then going into an interview, some questions you might have after looking at the form is, hey, I noticed you've had a deficit for the past 5 years, and I'd really love to hear what the strategy is going forward to like help the organization, or maybe there's an endowment that I don't know about. But I'm really interested in like how you're addressing that situation for the longevity of your organization. Or you could just ask like, hey, I saw that there's been some interesting turnover in board members, and I'd really like to hear some more context around that, and how you're building diversity on your board if you notice some red flags around that. It's okay to ask questions, even if they're hard questions. You just can't be rude about it, or they might get upset. But I've definitely asked some hard questions in interviews. One time I looked at Glassdoor, and there were quite a few really negative reviews, and I just point blank asked them what they're doing about their employee morale, because I had seen quite a few unhappy reviews on Glassdoor, and it was significantly more than would be what I consider average. I think it was like 40 reviews in 1 year that were 1 to 2 stars. And so I was just curious what they were doing to address it. And ultimately I didn't pick the job, but it was still a very helpful conversation. I think it's important to think about when you're job searching, even when you're interviewing, you might not take the job. You might get the offer and decide it's not the right fit for you. But you want to make sure you're being picky if you can be. And it's okay to say no to jobs. If you can afford to, it's okay to say no to something that doesn't feel right for you. And two more examples of ways that you can look up some information. You want to look at their finances. If they're a for-profit, they're not going to have a 990, but you can look at some general information. If you click on this link, it will bring you to DNB. It's I frankly can't remember the full name of this website, but it gives you a good overview of the amount of revenue that a company receives, how many employees they have, and when they were incorporated as a company. And it's just helpful to get an idea of how much money is this company dealing with, and how many employees are there. Because before you even go in, you can have an idea of if this is the type of company you want to work at. Do you want to work at a huge company, or do you want to work at some kind of a small team? It's really important to think about these things, and then people have some informed information before you go in. And I picked Google just because it seemed like a really easy one to think about. Oh, and everything I'm showing you is free. I'm not giving you any resources that you have to pay for, because I feel like that would be extremely unfair. I apologize for not mentioning that earlier, but again, all these links are clickable when you get the deck later. And again, this is the only resource that you have to create a login for, but you don't have to pay for it. And this is PayScale. So when you're looking at jobs, you want to know how much money you should be receiving. Like, what is a comparable salary to this role for other people? And I say that because it's especially important if you are queer and or trans. It is very common to be undervalued or to be given a lower estimated salary, or to take less money or feel afraid to negotiate. And knowledge is power, right? It's super cliche, but it's so true. So if you're looking, example, to be an administrative assistant and you have no idea how much is typically made, but you want to make sure that you're asking for the right amount of money, it's helpful to see what other people in your region make. And so for this one, I picked Austin, Texas. Hopefully that's helpful to anyone. But you can pick based on location and like the name of a title. So I recommend you do this right before you get into an interview, because they may ask what your desired like pay range is. It doesn't always get asked in an interview. It might be later, but you want to make sure you walk in with the right information. And they also give you an idea if you might get a bonus or not. And I would say even when you're employed, you want to keep checking PayScale. You want to make sure that you are getting what is a fair compensation for the work you're doing. Let them know how much you're making in your bonus, because then you can compare it to what the average is in your area. And same with salary. You can actually look at how the salary increases over the years. And I didn't share it because it was very binary, but it does compare men and women and the salaries they make. But again, because it only showed men and women, it didn't seem particularly helpful, and it felt very much not conducive to something that would be helpful for trans people, especially people that are non-binary, because I don't know how they really sort that information. So now you have some different ways that you can prep. You're going into this interview, and the important thing is to think about what you need to look for when you're at this interview and what you should ask. Especially when you're looking for something that's going to be queer and trans friendly in any way. I just recommend being really direct and upfront about it. The more you skirt around a question, the easier it's going to be for a potential employer to like avoid your question or redirect it, or just not really answer it at all. So it could be something as simple as, what does your organization do to make queer and trans people feel welcome and accepted here? What does your DEI initiatives look like? Do you have any employee resource groups? How many people in your leadership are people of color, are disabled, have identified as queer, trans, or anything from the LGBTQIA2+ community? You can ask any of these things, and it's more than acceptable. These are not like unacceptable questions. You just want to ask about the representation. You don't need to get exact examples, right? But it lets them know what your priorities are, and that you really value DEI, and that you want a very inclusive and welcoming space. I would also ask specifically about like how they're approaching their DEI. Like, what exactly does it look like? What have they done in the past, and what's the future? It may sound like you want to avoid that, but you want to be really upfront and straightforward. And while they might give you an answer that they just think you want to hear, and that's something you should keep in mind, you want to also observe how they react to the question itself. Do they seem surprised you asked it? Do they seem kind of annoyed? Do they seem excited that you asked? What exactly is the tone? And when they're giving you the answer, how are they delivering it? Can you sense that it seems genuine? Do you personally believe them? You want to make sure you're trusting your instincts. Something I tend to ask at any company I'm thinking about working with is, do they ever turn away money for ethical reasons? Like, what is the line that they draw of reasons they wouldn't want someone's support? And that is really helpful to know, because some places there is no line, right? Some places will take money from anywhere. They'll take money from the prison industrial complex, which is a real thing. But that matters, because where they're taking their money from shows if they are actually welcoming to your community. And if they say yes, I would ask for the example. You could say they could keep it anonymous, but you want to hear like the exact story, or the like the instance where they said no. And then finally, another thing that you really want to think about around queer friendliness and trans friendliness is professional development opportunities, and if there's room to grow in this role. I would say that depends, this latter part depends on what you're looking for. Maybe you're just looking for a job where you can stay in the same exact position for a very long time because you're looking for a survival gig. And you really just need insurance. You don't really care about where it goes. And that's fine. Again, I'm not judging you. I know plenty of people that really works for them. But maybe you want a place where you start out from the bottom and you end up becoming a manager, or you learn specific skills, or you can change teams. You want to know what the future could hold for you and see if this is a place where you could stay for more than a year or two. Because right now that's pretty much the average, is people in your and my age group, we stay at jobs for 1 to 2, maybe 3 years. And I know a lot of employers get very spooked by that, but if they want to avoid that, this is a great question to ask them. And I would say the reason you care is because you want to know how invested they are in the people they're hiring. And that's what that question really says for me. But really, at the end of the day, when you're looking at the questions you're asking and how they react to them, and then what type of responses they're giving to your thoughtful questions, you want to trust your instincts, trust your gut. If you feel like you're really uncomfortable asking these questions, and it's not just because you're afraid to ask the questions in general, like you've practiced asking them to friends, you've done some practice interviews, and you feel ready, and then you get into the room and you just feel instantly uncomfortable, that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because that might mean that whether they're being intentional or not, they are making you uncomfortable and not feeling safe. And if you get to a point where you don't want to come out at this meeting, that's fine. You don't have to disclose anything in an interview. You're not required to. But it will impact what types of questions you're going to ask. It's okay to still ask about DEI and not come out at all. You don't have to disclose that. That should be what straight people care about, in my opinion. So it's really up to what you feel comfortable and safe doing in the interview. And that might change when you get into the room. Maybe you walk in and you just immediately feel like you're being treated differently because of your race or your gender, or because you corrected someone on a pronoun and they got weird about it. That's all real things, and that's a valid feeling. And I don't want you to just think you're overreacting, because you're probably not. And when you're interviewing, another thing you really want to think about as you've started working on these questions you're going to ask them is looking at how they are trying to show their inclusivity to the outside world. So are pronouns listed on their site? Do they use heavily gendered language on their website? For example, I know quite a few years ago, Planned Parenthood was very woman-centric. And so everything that they said they served, it was for women, which is extremely transphobic and very exclusive. But they've recently changed their language, but that might be something you want to keep in mind. If you're working in reproductive rights, that's not just women's rights, right? And you want to see how they're describing that and how they address that in their work. What statements have they made around social justice? Do they seem performative, or do they seem genuine? Are they just apologizing, or are they taking accountability talking about what actions they're taking and what real work they're doing? Or are they just throwing a rainbow on a logo, or just saying like, love is love? These are really important things to look at. What does the company itself do? Is this a company that serves communities, or is this a company that is a bank? Like, it's just important to think about what they do and how that might impact intersecting communities that are also part of the LGBTQIA2+ community. And then looking at their mission, vision, and values, especially if they're a nonprofit, they should have that very clearly on their site. But a lot of companies do as well, especially in like the social goods sector. And you want to know that their values aren't really upholding a lot of oppression, which is super common in the workplace. And you want to make sure that it resonates with you. It's one thing if that's not a real value or of super importance to you, if the workplace itself is safe, but I would say that if their mission, vision, and values seem extraordinarily exclusive or gatekeepy, that's my new favorite word here, that's a red flag for you. And then looking at how are they trying to uphold these values? Like, oh, we say that we believe in equality. Hard stop. That's the end of the sentence. Do they have any evidence of what they're doing towards that? Or is it just a statement? And you can also ask them about that in person. You can say like, hey, I saw that you talked a lot about racial justice, and I'd really love to know what exactly you're doing around that, because I couldn't find a lot of information on your site. Totally acceptable question. Nothing inappropriate, unprofessional about that. And I did give some examples of what you might see on a site, because I feel like sometimes it's helpful just to see it. So this is Fenway Health. It's an organization that serves people of color and LGBTQIA2+ communities. And I believe this was last year, they had kicked off new efforts to become more inclusive, because they wanted not only the people they serve, but the staff to feel like they were really embodying their mission and what they do. And so they created these pronoun pins. It was like a really small gesture, but they said it was the first of many steps. And I thought that it was really interesting that they had this on their homepage for quite a while, so that people could understand how much of a priority this is to them. And they went on to talk about some other initiatives they were doing, but I thought that it was really interesting that they didn't just say like, oh, we're giving out pins, we care about trans people and queer people and the LGBTQIA2+ community. They really talked about why, the intent, and future plans to hold themselves accountable in the future. And that is really important. And another example is the Doula Project. And it's an organization of doulas that serves pregnant people. And they don't say women anywhere, which they shouldn't, right? That's the goal, is for it to be more inclusive. Women aren't the only people that get pregnant, and not all women can get pregnant, right? So they very specifically say all pregnant people. And to me, this really speaks to the fact that they're trying very actively to make not only a statement, but to make sure the people they serve feel included. And this doesn't alienate anyone, right? Like, this is how it should be. But it's not that common, unfortunately. And then after the interview, and I do want to say we're about to pause for questions, but this is the last piece. After you've had this interview, you want to really reflect and decompress after you've spoken to them. It might mean that you kind of just write down what happened, or maybe you record yourself saying like what your experience was, or you just talk to a friend. It helps to really think through what happened, because sometimes you need to process it, right? So you want to think, am I ready to disclose if I haven't already? Do I want to tell them that I'm part of the LGBTQIA2+ community? How comfortable did I feel? Did I feel safe in this conversation? Did I feel like people were othering me, or made it seem like I was like weird or different, or like this like non-traditional person? And honestly, like, did they seem kind of antagonistic? Like, did they actively misgender me? Did they make sure to use the pronouns I had listed to them, or anything like that? And then think about if you're in person for an interview. This point is really only applicable to that, but if you're interviewing in an office or at a workspace of some form, what did people seem like? Did they seem calm? Did they seem really quiet, like there was absolutely no noise? Did they seem really stressed out? Did they seem happy? Just generally, their seemingly emotional state is really helpful for you to know. Usually if I see a extremely quiet place, I take that as a really red flag. To me, it sounds like it's a place where you're working like nonstop, and there's absolutely no room for community or to let people have some downtime, and that's alarming. I would not want to work in a place where I felt like there's not even 1 second of the day where I could just breathe for a moment. And then what does the space itself look like? Normally I look to see if they have gender inclusive bathrooms or if it's just a men and women's room. That is something I really care about. And even if you don't personally want to use those types of restrooms, it tells you what they're prioritizing in their office space itself. Next, you want to think, did they really answer your questions? Like, hey, I asked this question about their DEI efforts and somehow we got off track and they ended up talking about like what work I'm going to be doing. Or they told me that we were at time and they didn't give me any option for follow-up. Those are super important things to think about. What questions do you still have, especially the unanswered questions? And then, do you still want this role? Like, after you've sat with these people or spoken to them through a phone or through video conferencing, are you still at all interested? Like, does this place seem like it might be a good fit? Do you like the people you talk to? Are you just curious, you're not sure? Or do you totally not want it? You want to think about that before you send a follow-up of any kind, because that's going to impact what you write and what you're asking them or not asking them. And in your follow-up, you want to, I'll be honest, I know people say within a week you should send your thank you. I recommend you send it the same day. The reason is because most people are told to send it 1 week or a couple days after, and I think that's nonsense. You want to say your thank you and whatever questions you have while you're still fresh in their minds. And because it makes it seem like you're really engaged in the job, especially if you do truly want this job. I would say, like, in terms of like relationship building, which is really what job hunting is, it just shows that you're really attentive to the conversation and that you want to keep it going and that you're being really thoughtful and really proactive. I would never wait more than 24 hours, frankly, but some people would wait a little bit more. But I say don't do it 24 hours. I honestly, I usually do them within an hour of an interview, just while it's still fresh in my mind and I know how I feel. And so that they can really use that as part of their feelings around this interview process. And if they want to bring me back in or give me an offer, I feel like it really sends it home a lot quicker. When I write the thank you or whatever follow-up email for my interview, I talk about the conversation we had. Maybe we had one little like joke moment, or we spoke about something really specific, or we got off track for a second. It just makes you see more like a human and not just a person looking for a job and talking to you, this one person that might get you a job. It makes it a lot more of a conversation. And it could just be something really little, like, hey, I really loved hearing just about like what you're doing with your work on a platform, or hey, I really love just hearing about this book you're reading, because you might get asked non-traditional questions. And then you want to talk about if you're still interested. So I would say you never want to say you're not interested, even if you aren't. At least that's what I would do. I tend to be really polite. I don't want to burn bridges in case they know someone at another job I'm looking for. But if I truly want this job or I want to keep talking, I will say that. I'll say, like, I really want to reaffirm just how interested I am in this role. And I feel that way because I think we have very shared values. And I think my experience with events and my experience with public speaking really would benefit this team, and I could learn a lot from you all as well. Or maybe you just say, like, I really want to continue this conversation and see how I might fit into your organization. And then if you have any outstanding questions, especially if you feel like they didn't answer a question fully, you could say, like, hey, I want to just circle back about this question around DEI. You had mentioned that you have ERGs, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that if you could give me some context. And if it was your second interview, that's when I would really dig into like the DEI, because they might not feel that in your first interview if they're doing multiple rounds, and that's okay. I tend to say, like, I look forward to hearing from you, and then I make sure my references are ready, because if you're at that second interview stage, you're most likely going to end up needing references. So sometimes that means you're preparing your references for your pronouns, or you want to make sure they're looking at like DEI, or you want to make sure that they're looking at how they manage their management style. Because a reference is a really helpful way for you to also interview these people yourself. You'd say to your reference, hey, I really want to see if this place values upward mobility. Could you try and find out a little bit about that for me while you're talking? And then say, like, I really want you to focus on my experience with fundraising, or I want you to focus on my experience planning events or scheduling things. It's just really helpful to set every expectation about like what you're looking for out of a reference, and what you might need help with. And you want to pick people that you trust, not like, you don't want to gamble on a reference and get someone that you don't know how they feel about you. So I want to, again, pause for questions, and I'm hoping we have some this time. Oh, I'm glad Tyler also agrees about same day thank yous.
I have a question I'd like to ask. So I was wondering if you have tips for sort of job searching in the context of COVID, because I know I spent some time like looking for remote jobs, and it was really hard to sort through all of the like customer service associate and contact tracer and all of that. And just sort of figuring out how to navigate, if you are looking for an in-person job, how to sort of screen for whether it's going to be, you know, as safe as possible for the workers. And then two, also trying to figure out how to find remote options for work, given that, you know, this isn't going away, and people are immunocompromised and might not be able to do in-person jobs. Do you have input on that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thank you, E. So what I would say is it's going to be a little complicated, right? We're in a really difficult time. First of all, the economic situation that is unfurled from both just the economy and economic system we rely on, but also COVID itself has really impacted how people are hiring right now. So some organizations are hiring for in-person. I would say if you're an essential staff worker or a organization that provides essential services, then it will probably be in person. But I would say don't assume that unless it's explicitly saying we are in person. If it is a place and you are really interested in working there, I would actually just straight up ask them. I'd be like, hey, here's my resume. I just want to just double check before I write a cover letter. Is this a remote only job, or are you, or is this like a in-person thing? Because sometimes they don't really clarify. I would say I've had multiple jobs where they don't really say their location or where it will take place, but they also don't say it's remote. And in that case, usually I make sure my resume is there, but then I do thoughtfully ask them the question and say, like, I'm just asking because like I'm really interested and I have experience in X, Y, and Z. So it's not like really a cover letter, but it does kind of like prime you for a cover letter. But if you're looking really generally like just at listings, you can sort quite a few, like especially in Indeed, you can sort by remote or in person. But I do think that even when it says it, I would double check. And if it is in person, it is more than appropriate to ask what precautions they're taking for public safety. And in terms of like, if you want to approach being immunocompromised or high risk, I am high risk, so I can understand how scary this can frankly be to job hunt, especially when people say it's in person. I would look at how many employees they have, because if they have over 15, they are legally obligated to give disability accommodations based on ADA. But I would specifically ask how they're protecting employees that may be immunocompromised or have immunocompromised loved ones that are in their households, or if they're a caregiver. And that could be just a question that you send to the hiring manager. It's not unacceptable to just straight up reach out to them. But I would say, like, I'm acknowledging how much time that's going to take. Reaching out to each listing you see would be a lot of work. So I would say you want to kind of pare it down to things you're interested in, or that seem like you might want to work there. I know that that's like, it's really adding another step. And I think that it's just a really, it's an unfortunate consequence of what's happening right now. But I would honestly see a red flag if they're trying to get you to interview in person right now, especially for a first round. I would, first of all, if that happened, I would then ask them if they could accommodate to a virtual one for safety reasons. And you could disclose why, or you could not. Frankly, I think if they're going to push back very strongly, even without you giving a specific reason, I would be a little concerned, because I don't think it's an outrageous request to say, hey, I'm not feeling particularly comfortable being in groups right now or going out in public. Is there any way we could have a virtual interview, at least for this round? And I think if they responded in any way that was other than a yes, or like we can't do that right now, but X, Y, and Z, like because this job will have to be in person, I would take that as a huge red flag. And I would continue to ask about protections for staff if it's going to be an in-person job you're taking. And I would think really thoughtfully about specific questions around it. Like, how are you preventing the spread from the work we're doing into our own households? And what PPE are you providing to staff? And what does the future of this organization look like if COVID continues to be a problem into 2021? They're all real questions that I would suggest asking. I would also say you could look, I think it's Pink Jobs is the listing, and they have a lot of remote jobs. So there are jobs you can get that aren't customer service, and it's really frustrating to have to pair those out. But I would say you could also look based on roles. So maybe you want to be a project manager. You could find virtual project management roles. I would say in terms of if you don't want to go through the effort of having to personally contact people, a good first step would be just start looking for jobs based on positions. Like a lot of nonprofit jobs you can do from home, regardless of what some organizations may think. Not everything must be completed in person. Oh, thank you. Thank you, E, for sharing Pink Jobs. But I will say, like, I just want to acknowledge that it is a really frustrating time to be looking for a job, especially to clarify remote versus in person. So someone is asking, how would you suggest addressing problematic language or practices you may have experienced in your interview process to your interviewers after you've taken the job? That's an amazing question. So I feel like every answer, I'm like, it's complicated. There's a couple things, but it is complicated. So when you've taken this job and you've already started, when you have taken this job and you've already started there and you've been in the workplace, I would say it depends on some things. Are you already out? Have you disclosed it? And are you really comfortable talking about that? And do they seem receptive? If the answer is yes, I would just straight up ask for a meeting with HR or the hiring manager, whoever in your job was the one who leads those types of policies. And I would try to really calmly, which can be really difficult, calmly talk about what language was problematic or upsetting or offensive, and why it is like that, and some suggested alternatives. And if it's practices, that's going to be a little tougher to broach, but I would still say you would want to calmly, which is really difficult, go in and talk about like, hey, in our interview, I had noticed that there was a comment about ADA accommodations, and it seemed like you were pushing someone to disclose, or I don't know, whatever practice is really upsetting you. Maybe they thought that asking for pronouns was weird, and it just seemed like they were pushing you not to even phrase it. Or maybe when they're making you wait, they're introducing you instead of letting you introduce yourself. These can all be practices that are not great. I'm sure I could come up with 1,000 examples of things that could be done better, but one of my favorites is like when there's implicit assumptions that someone's able-bodied and like maybe they could lift something heavy or walk long distances during an interview. Like one time someone on an interview wanted me to walk like 45 minutes with them, and that's just an assumption of the fact that I could be able-bodied, but fun fact, I'm not. So it could be really hard to broach that, but you could really talk about why it is problematic and why it might be contributing to a lack of inclusion and diversity in staff, and then give some real alternatives, some resources. I would say if it is really exhausting or you don't want to put that type of emotional labor in, you could just say like, hey, I've come across these resources about inclusive interviews for disabled people or for the LGBTQIA2 plus community. And I thought I'd share it with you because I thought it was really helpful. And I especially thought like X, Y, and Z might really positively benefit our interview process. That's another way you could go. That way you're not really having to educate them, but you are sharing a resource. And I will say something I should mention. At the end of this deck, there are a bunch of resources that I have shared so that if you get into a workplace and you want to give them some information, you don't have to try and look everything up on your own. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I gave you some like 101 documents, some articles that might be helpful for people to know about, so that you're not trying to explain like queer issues 101 or intersectionality 101, stuff like that. And I would say if you don't feel safe or you're not sure, I would recommend trying to find out if there's an anonymous way to give that kind of feedback. Maybe you aren't sure that feedback is really a welcome thing at your organization. Not every place wants to hear what they're doing wrong and how to fix it. See if there's some kind of a way that you can anonymously provide that information, and that would be how I would do it. And in that case, it would be really difficult just because if you're trying to be anonymous, you don't want to be too specific about your experience. So you would want to frame it around like, I really think that this should just be part of the process and a standard procedure for interviewing. And that way it doesn't sound like, oh, well, some anonymous person experienced being misgendered and nothing happened. And they said something really inappropriate. So it really depends on which of the things you feel comfortable with. Obviously, legally, they can't fire you for being queer or trans or any part of the spectrum of the LGBTQIA2 plus community. But that's not full protection, right? There's a lot of things that go into being safe at a workspace and not being fired. And so I would say it really depends on which way you feel comfortable broaching it, and understanding that they could possibly find some way to fire you that won't be for that reason, because we are at will in every state, which is why I say the limitations around safety and protections are very limited. And understand like what the risks might be and how they might like receive that information. That was a very long-winded answer, but I hope that that's helpful. Any other questions? Okay.
Got another one.
Ooh, great. This is awesome.
So, yeah, so you've talked a lot about like, you know, forming connections and how important relationships are in finding jobs. And so I was wondering if you had tips for young people, especially on how to form those connections, especially if you don't have a lot of experience in different workplaces or anything. Yeah, like how do you get started forming those relationships?
Okay, you have great questions, Z. Okay, so I will say I can only speak from how I've done it. When I went to university, I didn't have anyone in my family or in my life that was in like a white collar job. My parents are nurses and they are disabled and have retired. So they had no idea of the job process. And no one in my family, my siblings weren't in white collar jobs at the time. They had only worked blue collar jobs. So I felt like there was this secret language and I didn't know how to get these special mentors people were talking about. And I ended up leaning into, in my case, because I had the privilege of going to university, going to our like work employment department, and they gave me some really bad career advice, but they did give me some different internships to apply to. But I have very strong feelings that you should only take paid internships. I don't believe in unpaid labor unless you're legitimately volunteering and you know that that's the cause and you're not relying on that for your career. And there's a difference, right? Interning, you're trying to advance your career and figure out how to get your foot in the door, and you should be paid for that because you're doing real work. I would say internships is one way, but what I really did that helped is I did do some kind of cold reach outs on LinkedIn. And I would say they were people that had something in connection with me, like maybe they went to Pace University, which is where I went, or maybe they knew someone that I know, which wasn't many people, honestly. It was like teachers. I would get introductions from like someone I had lessons from. But I did do some straight up cold messages where I was like, you have a job that I want one day. Like in 10 years, I want to be a director of development, and I have no one in my life that understands how to do that. And I know that this is a really weird stranger messaging you, but I am in dire need of a mentor. And I'd be really honored if we could just talk over coffee or on the phone, and I could get any advice from you. And I feel like something people sometimes overlook is just the power of being really honest and direct and vulnerable. And I just talked about how I felt it would be so hard to get my foot in the door as a person that is queer and like reads queer. I feel like it's impossible for me to really be in the closet. No one seems to believe it anyway. So it just felt like I didn't know what to do, and I had no guidance, and I just was really honest about it. And I would say I got quite a few no's, but I eventually got 2 yeses from complete strangers. And honestly, I'm grateful to this day that they did that, because they gave me advice on my resume, which sucked. And they helped me get my internship by fixing my resume. And then from there, I just started trying to talk to as many people as possible. I would say I actually didn't focus, as I started networking on like my job, I just tried to connect with them as people, like something they might find interesting, or find out their passions. And then from there, I'd be like, hey, I'd love to keep in touch with you. And then slowly start building a relationship that way. It is really difficult. And I would say if you have a hard time with soft social skills, it can be particularly hard. But I will say I am terrible at subtlety, and I don't think that a lot of soft skills came to me naturally, and you can develop them. But you want to make sure that you are being genuine to how you feel, and you're not pretending to like people, because they'll be able to sense it. I'm going to move on. I am going to try and fly through this because I know we're close to time, and I want to make sure if we have any extra questions, we can cover them. But I will say, like, a lot of this I've already talked about. So when you possibly get an offer, let's say you've had a couple rounds of interviews, or maybe it's just one and then they offer it, really depends again on the industry. You should think about if you want to come out or disclose, or what you want or need to do. Let's say you're about to transition. You might want to mention that before you get hired, especially if you need health insurance coverage. That might be a really important time for you to find out if they're okay with that. Maybe you don't want to work at a place where this is going to be a deal breaker, and this is your moment to disclose deal breakers. And you don't have to, but I'm just saying it might be a helpful thing for you to consider. I tend to want to look at all the benefits. I want to know what type of benefits does a trans person have? How do they list the benefits? Is the language gender inclusive? What does parental leave look like? Even things that don't personally impact me, I want to know about, just to see how they value their employees. And I want to encourage you to negotiate salary. I think that a lot of LGBTQIA2+ people feel this fear around negotiating salary because they think they're going to scare off an employer. But here's the thing. The worst thing that happens is they say no, or maybe they get so offended they take away their offer. The latter is really uncommon. A lot of times, if they really won't do it, they'll just tell you straight up, like, this is the best offer we can give you, and I'm really sorry. And I think it's up to you to determine if that's enough, if it feels fair and adequate, and if you can say no or not, based on your needs. I usually ask for 24 hours or 2 business days or something to think over, unless I'm 100% sure. I can think of the job I'm at right now is the only time I've said yes immediately. And I think that unless you are 4,000% sure you want something, I would take time to think it over. Especially if you're going to negotiate, you could say, hey, I want you to come back with a more competitive offer because I've looked at comparable salaries and benefits for this role in this region, and it doesn't seem like it's up to par. And I think that I'm worth X, Y, and Z because of the experience I provide and the skills I have and what I bring to the table. And you can say, I'd love for us to both just take 24 hours to think things over, and hopefully you can come back with a counter offer. And that's like a power move also. You should, if you want to negotiate and you feel like you should, do it. Don't question it. Just try to push for more money. Especially in marginalized communities, you get lowballed a lot. I would ask them about salary transparency. I personally think that if you truly care about equity, you should have full company-wide salary transparency, because that's a really easy way to tell if people that are part of marginalized communities are being paid less than people with the most privilege. And it also is the best way to support workers. It only benefits employers for there to be a lack of salary transparency. And the more transparent salary is, the more equitable your work environment will be. And I think it's really important to ask that. Even if the answer ends up being no, at least you're making an informed decision around those types of values. And I will say it is not common to have salary transparency. So it's just an important thing. And I think the more people ask about it, the more employers will realize it's important. And I would say another thing you can think of is asking for some references from them. Like maybe you're still not sure about how welcoming they are to queer people. You could ask, like, is there anyone at your organization that identifies with this community that could talk to me about their experience? Because I want to make sure that I'm making a smart, like an informed choice for myself and that I'm walking into a safe environment. These are not unacceptable questions. I feel like sometimes people think they're asking the world of potential employers. And if any of these things come off to an employer as asking the world, I would be very alarmed by that. None of these are outrageous questions. And then finally, after you've started, first thing is if you feel safe being out, if you've come out already or you're planning to come out, if you're trying to disclose some new information, I would prepare to get a negative and a positive reaction. I always prepare for the worst case scenario so that anything past that is something that will give me some kind of hope or enthusiasm. But I think it's really important to be prepared for different reactions. And I would make sure you ask about who has access to staff demographics, identities, benefits, like who has information like that and how secure is it? I would say asking that can feel really intimidating, and I would only ask if that's truly something you're concerned about, and that you're asking it in an extremely respectful way, because it can come off, I would say people think that it's aggressive, even though it's not an actually aggressive thing. It just comes off aggressive for marginalized people. I would make sure you're disclosing your pronouns, your identity to HR if they don't already know and you need them to know for whatever reason. And mention your need for access to benefits. Ask them what that looks like, how long it takes to get those benefits. And if you're transitioning, this is your time to talk about it. Tell them that you're planning to transition. Your pronouns are this and that now. I'm in the middle of a name change, maybe I'm not. And I want everyone in the workplace to be prepared for that. And do you have a transition plan for your employees? And if not, what can you do to support me? And you can ask more about their DEI initiatives if you still have questions, or maybe you want to get involved with it. That's totally fine. I would usually wait to get involved with DEI stuff until I feel like I understand the work that I'm doing a little bit better, just because I feel like it can be really overwhelming to do emotional labor on top of preparing a new job. And then even if you feel super safe coming out, this seems like the world's most secure workplace. It is the queerest and the most trans-inclusive place you've ever worked at. They're anti-colonial, whatever you're looking for and what honestly you should be looking for. I would still prepare for there to be slip-ups. There's going to be misgendering. There will be microaggressions, and honestly, it's just gonna be cishet nonsense. Regardless of the type of environment you're in, I would just be prepared for it. And I would be prepared for people to have varying reactions to you correcting it if you choose to. But it's why I think self-care and really having these communities is so important, because it can really make the world of a difference, be able to talk to someone that's queer, not at your workplace, and just say like, this has been a really hard day. Someone misgendered me 3 times and I called it out, they corrected it, but it still really hurts. And it can be a lot more helpful to talk to someone that gets it. If you're unsure about where they stand, the preparing for different reactions is super important, and you're still going to be prepared for cishet nonsense, but I would say you want to test the waters. Maybe a way to do that with coworkers or with HR is to mention something that's in the news about the LGBTQIA2+ community, or some issues that are going on. And just try to gauge people's reactions to what you're saying and like how much they know, or how interested, or like, do they seem really off-put by it or not interested, or do they say something really problematic? That's going to give you some insight into whether or not you might feel safe to come out. look at their demographics. Again, if you feel comfortable, this is the thing you can ask, and it's more than acceptable too. I would also still mention access to benefits regardless. You don't have to frame it around your identities and who you are, but I think it's really important to understand how to access them and any information you might need. And if you're planning to come out or disclose or ask for specific information around your community, come with talking points and resources, because it is very likely these people will not know what you're talking about. You could go to the most like woke place ever, and they could still be completely naive about different types of intersectionality, sorry. And then finally, one other way that this might shake out, right, when you take a job is you might have had to take a survival job, a place that seems antagonistic to the LGBTQIA2+ community. Or you feel like you want to be in the closet, or you have to be in the closet for whatever reason. Again, no one is judging you for staying in the closet. And if they do, I'll fight them for you. But in all seriousness, no one's judging you for the choice you make on your disclosure. But you really want to think about what your boundaries are. Do you just want to not talk about anything in your private life? Do you want to really just keep it extremely work related and nothing else? Is the limit that they can't talk about partners? Or if they say something about your gender, you're going to correct them? Like where exactly is the line, and what is the closet and what isn't the closet for you? You might want to keep under the radar, which is really hard. But unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people do know how to do that, and it's really just a tough place to be. But sometimes it's necessary for your safety, and just try to figure out what that means and how to assimilate in the workplace. I hate even recommending it, but sometimes you have to. Like, if you're about to be homeless and you need a job and you get a job offer that seems crappy, but you really need it and you take it, it's okay to try and just not talk about anything personal and just really keep it work related to stay under the radar. You can slowly try to test the waters and see if there's anyone at your work that is welcoming. I would be really careful about how you do that. I would say talk about news or issues and not anything personal at first. And then consider if this is something you can tolerate for the long term, or is this just a placeholder until you get that job that's inclusive or that's in the field you want. And in this instance, self-care is just the most important, because this is going to be a really hard way to survive for many people. It's not impossible, and some people prefer not to be out, but if it's not from your choice and it's a safety decision, self-care is going to be the most important thing you do. And after you've started, you need to know your rights. So you need to know your rights around interviewing, but you need to know your rights as an employee at a company. And so I've provided the GLTBQ, Legal Advocates and Defenders, Lambda's Know Your Rights, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, some information for low-income LGBT people, Out and Equal Workplace Advocates if you need some legal assistance, Trans Legal Services Network Directory, and then Workplace Fairness Know Your Rights resource. And that last one might be helpful for you to share with other people looking for jobs. You should definitely review it. And especially once you've started somewhere, you want to reread that. But I want to make sure you have not only like legal resources if you need someone to represent you, but you also know exactly what you are and aren't entitled to. And then just some different places that you can reach out to for different kinds of support. And I will get to questions, but I did want to show you, I do have these extra resources, some articles about the ACE community, the Arrow community, some different intersecting levels of oppression that relate to the LGBTQIA2+ community, and then just some different job seeking and employer resources so that you can share this with whatever job you're at, or maybe you have some friends in the HR field, this might be good to share with them. So I'm welcome for questions if anyone has any. I know we're like really, I think I'm at time actually. Oh, I'm perfectly at time. Oh, what a great question, Heather. Yeah, so I'm providing a link. It's going to be a PDF that you can download from Google Drive, and it will have all the links be clickable. Happy to provide my email if anyone has like questions, because it's a pretty small group. It's not like I'm giving my email out to like 300 people. But if you have like specific questions about what I spoke about today, I'd love, like, we could continue the conversation. or if you're looking to get into the nonprofit world, I could give you some pretty specific information on that. So I have about a decade of nonprofit experience, and I transitioned to gender fluid in the workplace. So I can also talk to that experience, but obviously there are things I can't speak to as clearly. But I'm gonna put my email in the chat for everyone.
Thank you so much, Jean. This has been super wonderful, so informative. So I'm incredibly impressed. I approached Jean about this topic and was like, hey, so I have this really big wish list of things that I would love for us to be able to cover for queer folks who are looking for jobs. And you just like checked all the boxes. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Honestly, this is just such an honor to get to do. I really had a hard time coming out from a pretty young age. I grew up in a pretty conservative area, and I didn't know if I could ever be open about my gender and my sexuality, and just like my lifestyle, my political views. And I'm really, really privileged and happy that I am in a place like that, but I want that to be a lot easier for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we will send out the link with the slides today, and then the video recording of this session will be available on the Queering Education website within a week or two, depending on how hectic next week is. And we would love for y'all to join us for our upcoming Queering Education sessions. Right now, there's only one on the calendar. For next week, it is called OMG, That's So Gay. It is with one of my coworkers at Out Youth who is a professional comedian. So it should be really fun. And then we have stuff that's scheduled for the rest of July and August as well on topics like immigration and racism in the queer community and disability and all kinds of other things as well, but they are not on the calendar yet because they're not exactly nailed down. So be on the lookout for those things, and thank y'all so much for coming. E, did you get a chance to share the feedback form? We do seek feedback on all of our presentations, and it's feedback, right? feedback.queeringeducation.queering.edu. I don't remember what it is. There's a form for it. But we'll get that out to you as well. And yeah, we hope to see y'all on the next one. There we go.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.